Hello, this is No BS Nutrition or Drake. We're going to talk about fasting. Hello everyone, today's video I'm going to talk about fasting, etc. What you should do on a fast or any other opinions that I have. I am not expert on fasting, but I don't think fasting is bad for you. I think it could be a lot of positive. This is episode 6 of the podcast. If you like content like this, please share comments below, maybe ideas I could talk about, topics, etc. Or just comment. So let's get into it. Should I fast? That's the topic today. What is fasting? So fasting, here's the quick short definition. I'm going to put fasting in my terms. Fasting is a period of time that you're restricting calories or food to eat later throughout the day. So for example, let's say you eat breakfast, right, 6 a.m. But you fasted for until 8 p.m. That is a fast because it's longer than 5 hours. Around 5 hours, that's when the feeding window of fasting starts. So that's a little quick definition. What is fasting not? Fasting is not restricting calories and binging on junk food or food. Fasting is not eating at 6 o'clock and then, or not eating at all. Fasting is not eating at all, and 8 o'clock you eat whatever you want, pizzas, cupcakes, or etc. Fasting is supposed to be still eating whole foods, but eating in a time frame that is actually beneficial to you and to lower more stress. I don't want people to starve themselves throughout the day and eat like shit throughout the night. That is not what fasting is about. That is a misconception. What is traditional fasting in my opinions? So fasting to me, I like traditional fasting comparing like programming, right? We get different programming of fasting. That's not what it is, but I like to compare it as that. So let's say a training program, right? Like push-pull legs. For fasting, I would say it's like 8-8, right? You eat at 8 o'clock a.m. and you eat at 8 o'clock p.m., right? Or let's just say another term of fasting. Let's say, let me look at my script real quick. Let's say you eat around 2-8. So around 2 p.m. and you eat at 8 o'clock p.m., right? Whatever that's longer than 5 hours, that is traditional fasting. It's like a program. Have you heard about 16-8? That's about 2-8 in military time. So 16-8, etc. That's like fasting programs that you could do. Or you could do the traditional fasting is just eat one meal a day. It's many fasting things out there that you could do. What I like to do about fasting for me or for clients that I would suggest is trying to fit it around your scheduling. Not everyone can eat breakfast time. They might fast on lunch and wait to dinner time, right? Whoever's longer than 5 hours. So whatever fits your schedule and whatever's going to help you with less stress, that should fasting be. So I like to compare traditional fasting into programming fasting. That's for me, but that's not what it is. I just like to compare it to that. Intermittent fasting is something, okay, it is something, but the time is shorter. It's the same thing, pretty much. Intermittent fasting is the same thing as traditional fasting. The reason why I split it up so you guys can better understand what's the difference, in a sense, it's probably no difference, but you can see different ways, different points of view of fasting. So that's why I split intermediate with traditional fasting. It's probably not the same thing. Like I said, I'm not expert on this topic, but I used to do it, and this is how I explain it to myself. So I just want to give a quick warning. So the shorter time frame of fasting is like 5 hours. Some people will argue about that, like that's not fasting, but that's around the time that the body expels a lot of waste, etc. That 5-hour mark is fasting or intermediate fasting. It's a shorter time frame. But real fasting is like 8 hours, the time you go to bed. So what I would suggest to a client who fasts for 8 hours is the type of client will skip a meal instead and eat a bigger meal throughout dinner time. So they can become more fuller, they can become more satisfied, right? For a client I have now, they want to do fasting. The only thing I want to say is if you're going to do fasting, try and fit it to your schedule. So that client can wake up at around 6 o'clock and he can skip lunch, and doing so he will eat more on dinner time. And in that process, he can eat bigger, more meat. Let's just say a pound of meat, a almost a pound of potatoes, and that's a bigger dinner for him. He still gets his calories. If he doesn't, that's okay. I want to make sure he gets his protein intake. So that's what intermediate fasting is. It's longer than 5 hours, or around 5 hours, that you would consume your next meal. You typically do 2 to 1 meal, possibly, depending who you are. You still eat about 2 meals. That's my opinion of intermediate fasting, of course. Okay, so what to be aware, and I'm going to talk about micro to macronutrients. Micro to micronutrients. Macro. So fasting is a great way to lower stress levels and become more less dependent on food timing, right? But at the same time, I want to clarify that if you're fasting, you have the misconception you can eat like shit for a time frame and still lose weight. You are wrong. That could possibly work, but I highly suggest not to do so, because you're going to be very hungry, especially skipping a meal that you're used to eating. So if a client wants to eat, let's say 160 grams of protein, they have to hit, right? Or 200 grams of protein. And I want them to split it up. So they will eat around breakfast time, if they can, 100 grams at breakfast, and 100 grams during dinner. So they at least got enough protein to sufficient muscle growth. And a lot of people who doesn't hit that protein target can be a negative, because it would pare down muscle and it won't have the recovery ability, especially if you have a stressful job. I want to make sure during this process of fasting they hit their micronutrients, because micronutrients is way important to facilitate fat loss and muscle growth. If you're fasting and not hitting your macro and micronutrients, micronutrients, then it will be harder to actually perceive fat loss and trying to build more muscle and just being healthier in general. It's not about visual results, it's about how do you feel. Because if you feel like poop all the time, you won't perform as good in your quality of life. And that can lead to not reaching your fat loss goals, or building muscle, or being focused on something, right? So I really want to focus on the person who is doing fasting. Make sure to hit their micronutrients and their macronutrients, because that is important. Remember, we are just eating 2 meals or 1 meal a day. Of course, I would suggest 2 meals, just because the protein target, eating 100 grams in or 200 grams in 1 meal is insane. Especially if I have a female that's eating around 150 grams, that's like 5'5", and they have to split for 2 meals. That's insane. And also, I just want to be aware, even the micronutrients and the macronutrients, it's very important to hit. So it's no excuse you guys should not hit those targets. You need to hit those targets. At least hit around 0.6 grams about it. So you're eating like 200 grams of protein, at least hit 170 to efficient muscle growth. You don't have to hit it exactly, but hit it enough. Especially if I have a client that's not calculating calories, I especially want them to hit their calorie intake. And the body will adjust to this, so if they're more hungrier, I want them to eat more food, more fattier cuts of meat, because fats are important, remember that. Just because of fats do not make you fat. You need fats to also for hormones, and to actually facilitate fat loss. The reason why I keep saying this over and over, fat loss, muscle growth, because people don't understand that these are important to actually do the trick. So I just want you guys to remember, focus on macro to micronutrients. Those are the 2 important things when doing this. Okay, this topic is pretty fun. I just want to make sure I'm talking about everything pretty correctly, not trying to play any misconception. Now we're going to go on the pros and cons. So the pros of fasting is mental clarity, because you're not focused on food so much. Reduced inflammation, that can be another positive. Meal timing, especially I would like a client to eat during breakfast, at least kickstart their day, speed up the metabolism to become more active, because the body relies on food to have more energy. Of course, if you got used to fasting, your body's going to adapt and just wait during dinner time, but that's for most people. They got to rely on breakfast time. What else for a pro? You got reduced inflammation, satiety, so maybe you're eating during dinner time, you're more full. Especially this can work on a cut, because it's just time restricting calories. That was fasting boil down to. You're just restricting calories so you can have a bigger meal for later. That's literally what fasting is about. Of course, I'm not talking about the mental benefits. The mental benefits are great. I used to do fasting, and I got less food dependent. I focus on less food. I focus on more tasks because I save about 40 minutes cooking and put 40 minutes on making a video. So that is the pros of fasting: saving time, having more mental clarity, lower stress, reduce inflammation, and that's really it. Cons is can promote binge eating disorders. So if you starve yourself throughout the day and eat a bigger meal, you might binge on Ben and Jerry's. That's just typical how it goes. That's why you see a lot of people that say fasting didn't work for me, and it's stupid because, well, they restricted calories to use the misconception of fasting, which is partly true. The misconception is to restrict calories for a long period of time, but they used it as a sort of way, as a cheat code, so they can eat their processed foods, which is a big misconception in the fitness world. That is not what fasting is. You don't restrict calories and just starve yourself until you get very hungry and start having a binge eating problem. That's why I say I highly suggest having 2 meals and eat your protein target. At least if you skip lunch, you're still fasting, because it's still 8 hours. It's not intermittent fasting, most likely. You're still fasting for a long period of time, but at least you're satisfied enough to push opponent and kickstart your day. The another con of this is, I keep falling off. The another con of this is, we just talked about binge eating disorders. It's the time restricting calories. You might be used to not time restricting calories. Like, let's say for a bodybuilder, right, who eats their 5 meals a day. The scarcity mindset, like if I don't eat this food at this period of time, I will lose muscle, or they get very anxious, etc. And that can also promote eating disorders. Also, the myth of micro to macronutrients. The myth of that. If you miss those macronutrients, then you might not hit your protein goal. And now we know that if you don't hit your protein goal, you're not going to recover or build muscle. Also, if you don't hit your fats and proteins, you're not going to facilitate muscle or fat loss. So it's going to be ironic for you to do fasting thinking you'll lose weight, which most likely you are. But if you do that and you do it wrongfully, you might lose weight, meaning you might lose more muscle mass. And there's no point losing weight if you're going to lose 6 pounds of mostly fat, and the rest is only 2 pounds of 4 pounds of, there's no point of losing weight if you're going to mostly lose muscle and only 2 pounds is fat. I'm getting a little mixed up on my words, so bear with me right now. But really the misconception is, if you're not responsible on hitting your micronutrients and your macronutrients for the day, if you're going to facilitate binge eating disorders, especially had in your past, that could be another problem. Starving yourself and not getting used to or having a scarcity mindset, a lot of anxiety, that could be another problem. But if you do it correctly, if you focus on macro to micronutrients and trying to focus on that, fasting might be a great example for you. Especially you have to stick with it for a while to get used to it. The body takes time to adapt. So I just want you guys to be aware of the cons and the pros as well. My opinions on fasting, who would I use it for? So who I would use fasting for is the person who is very anxious about meal timing, who wants to hit every meal in a certain amount of time. I want them to get less food dependent, because if they're not less food dependent, they might not be focused on the things they like. So for a bodybuilder, for example, who's not a bodybuilder anymore, but wants to do other things, but they have to worry about their meal prep, etc., I'll probably do fasting. Try to get them less food dependent so they don't think they're going to starve. Even though they might be anxious at first, I have to remember them, like, just hit your micro to micronutrients, just eat food, eat when you're hungry, don't binge on Ben and Jerry's, focus on the fruits and vegetables. If you are hungry, you could do intermittent fasting. Just remember, intermittent fasting, you're just waiting for 5 hours. So 7 to 12, right? 5 hours. That's intermediate fasting. Traditional fasting is longer than 8 hours, which I won't recommend it. I will recommend doing 5 hours just so you could get used to it. But if you have a job, you might get distracted enough so it won't be a problem. But I will use that type of fasting for somebody who is more who wants to be less food dependent, of course, or the client who wants to try something different, etc. And they want to try it, but they want to be safe. If they want to try it, I will remind them that it is just a tool. Fasting is just a tool, and it can be used to facilitate fat loss, possibly because you're restricting calories to eat more during dinner time, and the result of that high protein, high calorie meal is you might eat less calories than you were before. But the problem is if you're not going on a binging streak afterwards. So you have to be very considerate with this type of way of life that people do. You have to be careful. I'm not saying fasting is bad, but if you're getting started, I would highly suggest try 5 hours instead of 8 hours. Try to slowly work up to it, especially if you're at home 24/7 and you have snacks laying around the house. I would suggest doing only 4 hours, 5 hours. If you're a bodybuilder who eats 5 meals a day who wants to fast, I suggest definitely do 4 hours, because 5 meals you're eating every 3 to 2 hours. So if you're doing 5 meals, I suggest just to stack it up into 3 meals, wait 4 hours, 5 hours, trying to postpone it, trying to get used to the time, then you have the rhythm than before. Because funny thing is, your body get used to the meal timing. So if you eat at 7 and wait to 10 o'clock, wait to 10, you got used to it, right? You got used to that period of time. But if you eat at 7 and wait to 12, your body sends signals that you're hungry because it's used to eating at that time frame. Even though you might not be starving, your body is still used to eating that time. So I just want you guys to keep in mind. Also, what I would not use fasting for, I won't use fasting for the person that's have an eating disorder already, or that person wants to restrict calories and binge eat it. Really, just people that has eating disorders. That's not a great idea. I will try to get them used to eating at healthy foods, and I'm talking for both eating disorders. So for a binge eating disorder and also for an eating disorder. So someone who will restrict calories and starve themselves, or someone who will overeat. I won't really use fasting for that. I will try to make them better habits, like eating at good times, try to have protein, etc. Eating good healthy food. Maybe having that sweet treat, but make sure to eat the protein target first. Something like that, so they get used to it over time, and etc. Now we get to my opinions on fasting. Do I hate it? No. I think fasting is a great example to dip your toes in the water and see what you can do for yourself. Fasting could help with inflammation and lower stress levels, because if you have less stress levels, it could promote fat loss and overall build more muscle, especially if you have a lot of stress on the body. If you're a construction worker and you're not trying to focus on food or eat out so much, you can skip that lunch and eat during dinner time and eat a bigger meal after the gym. That's my suggestion. I will use for someone who wants to try it. But if someone who's just starting fitness and who is not really used to that meal timing, or not used to having meals throughout the day, who are not used to having fats and proteins, then I would definitely not do fasting right off the bat. Fasting is a tool that you can use. It's more advanced, like example for like advanced training. I won't tell a beginner to do advanced programming if they're not advanced. I'm not going to tell beginners to do 20 sets on something like Ronnie Coleman did 20 sets on something. It just doesn't make sense. But the person who wants to try it, I will definitely give them pros and cons and be aware. And I want to give a quick honorable mention is have sodium and water. You're fasting. You're not having typically any liquid calories or any liquid in general other than water. So what I would suggest you do is get LMNT. It's a sodium company. I do not work with them, but I heard it was good. Mike talks about it, and it's just sodium in the package. They have around 2,000 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. For someone who is active 24/7, or a typical gym goer who goes outside 24/7, they're burning a lot of calories and they're sweating a lot. So I would highly suggest supplement with sodium, especially if you're eating a whole foods diet and not eating out. So I just want people to be aware of that. You need sodium during this process and trying to become fuller so they don't have promoting binge eating. Okay, I'm going to get to I think that's really it for today's video. I'm going to see. Yeah, we talked about should I fast, what is fasting. We talk about traditional fasting and intermediate fasting. Those two I'm pretty sure is the same thing. It's just I separate them so you guys can understand. If it's not, please correct me. I'm not too sure on the subject. I just know a little bit. I tried it. I'm just telling my opinions. What to be aware on fasting. So take sodium, macro to micronutrients. Make sure you hit those. Pros and cons. So what's the pros? Feeling better mentally. Cons. Promoting eating disorder. My opinions. So what do I think? Who should I use it for? Etc. So that's really it. This is episode 6 on no BS nutrition. The reason why I made this video is really for a client who's trying this. I'm gonna try help with this client and actually go through this process with this client and see possibly it could work for this client. So I'm gonna tell my results later on. And that's really it for this video. If you like content like this, please like, subscribe, share this with a friend. If you guys think this topic was interesting, which I did actually like, it kind of makes sense in my head to use in a certain point of time, then yeah, comment below. What do your experiences with fasting? I don't really know. Okay, this is episode 6 with No BS Nutrition or Drake. Goodbye.